Thanks for your company, everyone. The US and South Korea say they want to send a warning to Kim Jong-un one day after his latest missile test. And so they conducted a joint military drill on Wednesday to showcase their ability to strike back at Pyongyang in case of emergency. North Korea claims it tested a nuclear-capable intercontinental ballistic missile early on Tuesday that could possibly hit the US mainland. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson says it is a new escalation of the threat against the US, its allies and the world. Let's bring in CNN's Andrew Stevens in Hong Kong. We've also got journalist Kaori Njoji in Tokyo and CNN's Ivan Watson in Moscow. Andrew, let's start with you in Hong Kong. As the world condemns this latest test, the North Korean leader reportedly promising more of the same.
That's right, Michael. Still a very, not surprisingly, belligerent tone coming from North Korea. Kim Jong-un was reportedly at the launch site, watching it live. This is according to KCNA, which is the North Korean news agency. And he said at that launch that this was a package of gifts to the US on its Independence Day, and he urged the scientists to continue to send big and small gifts to the Yankees, as he called them. So making it very clear there that North Korea is not finished in its testing, both of missile technology and also of nuclear technology. Now, Kim's people are also saying this was a chance for them to perfect various technical specifications for an ICBM, an intercontinental ballistic missile, and they said the tests had been an enormous success, and they had been able to develop the warhead to re-enter the atmosphere, to take heat resistance, etc. So they are still going very strongly with their nuclear and missile technology developments. Now, the response, as you say, was South Korea and the US having these missile tests in the seas of South Korea, and South Korea were very, very clear, saying that this was a precision targeting of the enemy leadership should there be an emergency. So they were replying very clearly to North Korea's provocation with their own. This is just hours after the Chinese and Russian leaders had both called on the US and South Korea to stop carrying out these joint military drills. So obviously that was being ignored by the US and South Korea. Michael.
Messages from both sides. Thanks so much, Andrew. Ivan Watson in Moscow, let's bring you into the conversation now. Vladimir Putin and his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping had a meeting. North Korea obviously very high on that agenda. What did we hear?
That was here in Moscow, and it coincided with the missile launch in North Korea. Both countries put out a joint statement where they expressed concern about the missile launch, but stopped short at condemning it. Both Russia and China are signatories to United Nations Security Council resolutions which effectively ban North Korea from nuclear weapons tests and further developing its ballistic missile technology. The two leaders put forward a proposed plan for de-escalating tensions on the Korean Peninsula, calling for what they described as a, quote, double freeze, which would mean that North Korea would suspend its nuclear weapons program, and simultaneously the U.S. and South Korea would agree to stop all joint military exercises, which of course infuriate North Korea. They also went further and basically took the opportunity to make some jabs against the U.S., saying that they don't want the U.S. to use the missile launch as a pretext for adding more weapon systems to South Korea. Both Moscow and Beijing do not like the recent deployment of the U.S. anti-missile system known as THAAD. And in this same joint document, they also said that they, in general, oppose the presence of U.S. troops in South Korea in general. That is a position of opposition from Beijing and Moscow that is unlikely to get very far with the U.S. since it has had troops deployed on the Korean Peninsula since the Korean War some 70 years ago. Michael?
Ivan Watson in Moscow and Karine Joji in Tokyo now. Somewhere else the US has troops positioned as well. There was a very strong reaction from Tokyo yesterday at this time when this was all unfolding. What's been happening there, and also what concerns there are for Japanese military to have its own defences against perhaps an errant missile from North Korea?
Well, Michael, the sheer proximity to Japan to North Korea leaves Japan in a very vulnerable situation, and I think that's why there was some fairly strong language from the Japanese government fairly quickly after this latest missile launch. And the Prime Minister Shinzo Abe is now making his way first to Brussels to meet with the EU and later to Hamburg to meet with the leaders of the G20 to try and see if he can bring together the international community to try and reach some kind of consensus for a stronger response to these provocative moves from North Korea, especially because years of sanctions and trade embargoes by many nations has failed to contain the threat of the heightening risks in the area. But I think at the same time, many of the options that Japan has, including, Michael, the possibility of increasing its ability to deter a missile should something approach the mainland here in Japan, are fairly limited. Because, for example, if Japan were to upgrade its current missile system, anti-missile system, and upgrade, for example, to a THAAD system, the defense minister has said that Japan is considering doing that. But this would really upset China. I mean, China was very upset when with South Korea with the THAAD system. Imagine what their reaction would be if Japan were to do the same. Not to mention, of course, the Article 9 in the Japanese Constitution, which prohibits the defense forces, the military here, from doing anything other than self-defense. So I think Japan's hands are tied if they are to act alone, and so even more critical that Japan try to engage not only South Korea and the United States, but try to involve Russia and China in taking more, what the Prime Minister says, constructive action.
Karine Joji in Tokyo, also Ivan Watson in Moscow, Andrew Stevens in Hong Kong. Thanks to all of you. Joining me now is CNN military analyst Lieutenant Colonel Rick Francona. Always good to see you, Colonel. South Korea and the United States conducted that joint ballistic missile drill on Wednesday. It was interesting. The South Korean Defense Ministry saying, as Andrew Stevens reported, it showcased precision targeting of the enemy's leadership in case of an emergency. Is that helpful in this situation? One thing the North has demanded is an end to joint military exercises. Here's really a joint drill.
Yeah, the timing of this is very suspect. Right after the Chinese and the Russians say that they're willing to work on the freezing the North Korean program if we also agree to freeze the U.S. And South Korean military drills, and then we do this. The weapons that they use are very interesting. These are long-range tactical ballistic missiles. And they would be the weapon of choice if you were going to try some sort of precision strike. And the weapons used are very accurate. So I think we're trying to send a message back to North Korea. I don't know how effective that's going to be. I think nothing has deterred the Koreans so far. They seem just hell-bent on developing this capability, and there's a real rush to this. Notice the pace of the tests that we're seeing.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, you know, a message certainly, but is it a message that could be heated or could be seen as a provocation?
Well, I don't know that they regard it as a provocation. If I was the North Koreans, I would be looking at this as maybe a weak response. It seems like a desperation move. So we've got to do something. The North Koreans have just fired their first ICBM. We need to show them that we mean business. And I think this was a pretty weak response.
Yeah, interesting analysis on that. Now, when it comes to the potential for a North Korean strike on the U.S., which is what the big fear is from the U.S. position, what are the U.S. Missile defense capabilities? I mean, really, there wouldn't be a whole lot of warning if they had a missile that could do this. What could the U.S. do about it?
Well, that's the problem. For years now, we've been trying to develop an anti-ballistic missile defense system. And it's been off again, depending on priorities and the threat assessment. And when we were facing, you know, the Russians or the Soviets, we had a mutual assured destruction. And I think that everybody realized that if anybody started a war, it would be the end both countries, so everybody was deterred. We're not sure that would work with North Korea, so now there's this scramble to get an anti-ballistic missile system that works. And we've tried different things. You know, the long-range missile interceptors coming out of Alaska, Hawaii, California, also using U.S. Navy Aegis cruisers to provide some sort of defense. The THAAD, it's just a patchwork that really hasn't proved that effective.
It's interesting, you know, the U.S., if there are defenses that would work if the attack was perhaps against U.S. forces in Japan or Korea, or those two countries specifically.
Yeah, that's a different animal. Now, you know, the Patriot batteries can handle the shorter range ballistic missiles, the kind we would see fired from the north into the south, and the THAAD system, which we're in the process of deploying, but that's on hold now at the request of the Korean government. That would also get the medium range ballistic missiles that would also come. So we've got defenses there. It's these long range, the intermediate range and the intercontinental ballistic missiles that we're having problems with, because they go up so high, and once they enter that terminal phase, very, very difficult to engage.
I wanted to ask you too, Colonel. I mean, there's always you know, one of the major concerns has been the possibility, the risk of miscalculation. One of these missiles going off course, hitting something, be it the coast of Japan or a ship in the sea, and what that could spark.
Or just the impression that it's going to coming at Japan. If the Japanese track it coming toward their territory, are they going to respond? And how are they going to respond? Are they going to launch an attack? Are they going to try and knock it down? Or are they willing to absorb a blow and then respond? So a whole bunch of questions we don't know the answers to. I can tell you, though, if a missile is launched at the United States and we believe that it's a threat, we will be forced to react. And you know, what's interesting, we're talking about the flight times. We're talking 37 minutes. That's not a whole lot of time to make a decision.
Yeah, exactly. And, yep, you've got to be pretty accurate. It's a difficult situation. Lieutenant Colonel Rick Francona, always good to see you, sir. Thank you so much.